It may seem like being a perfectionist in League is the key to improving very quickly, but in reality, most of the time it's what causes people to stagnate. A commonly used idiom when referring to goals with high expectations is quote unquote aim for the stars, meaning strive for something that appears to be completely out of reach. The idea is that you will likely fail to achieve the original goal, but you will still get close and end up higher than you would have if you had settled for a lower goal. This sounds great on paper, but it rarely works in practice. In this video, I'll be delving into the downsides of perfectionism and why it's bad for most players to have, especially beginners, but I'll also play devil's advocate and talk about some of the upsides of the mindset, so stick around towards the end of the video if that's something you're interested in. Someone that is a perfectionist refuses to accept anything below the highest level of capability. People that have this mindset often say the phrases, losing isn't an option, or second place isn't enough. In the context of League of Legends, this can appear in the form of wanting to last hit perfectly, have the fastest full clear time, have a 100% win rate in solo queue, etc. The problems with being a perfectionist arise when things don't go as desired, which is very common because of how unreasonably high the bar is set. Oftentimes when people do not hit these far out of reach expectations, they become prone to tilting much more easily. Without the self-awareness required to realize that they are getting tilted because of their extremely high expectations, their tilt will snowball into a full mental boom. With this comes a major lack of self-confidence due to seemingly endless failures. At this point, they may start to compare themselves to their teammates or opponents and start coping about how they're better at a particular aspect of the game because that's what they put so much mental energy into. But that doesn't mean they aren't lacking in many other areas. Getting out of this type of hole is no easy feat and typically requires a ton of self-reflection to figure out how they can rebuild confidence in their own ability to improve. Imagine that you're playing a physical sport with a valuable skill that requires precise aim and timing. Some examples that you may be thinking of are three-pointers in basketball, strikes in baseball, or knocking someone out in dodgeball. In the basketball example, you have to worry about your shot being blocked if the defense is close enough. As a pitcher in baseball, there are many things that you have to worry about. You have to keep an eye out for people trying to steal a base, as well as consider your opponent's weak points. If the batter is right-handed, you're going to treat it differently than if they are left-handed, and some may be more vulnerable to a slower pitch, especially if you started off with fast pitches, while others will get a home run if you try that. In dodgeball, you can't tunnel vision too hard, or you'll get surprised by a ball flying at you that you didn't notice because you were so focused on who you were aiming at. Now compare whatever sport you thought of to last hitting or landing skill shots such as Ezreal Qs. Whenever you're practicing by yourself, it's going to be much easier to do well than when you're in a real game. In a real game, those external pressures pull your attention away from focusing on just one thing, which forces you to rely on your subconscious habits to navigate the situation. Some people try to bypass this by warping how they see the game in order to make it easier for them to reach their goal. Most of the time, this is not a good thing to do. For example, they may intentionally not take good nearby fights because they know that they'll miss minions in the process, or they'll refuse to look at the minimap at all while clearing jungle camps because it would slightly delay their clear. Obviously, this is going to end up being a really bad habit to break, and it can cause many issues down the road. It's much easier to reach a basic level of competency in multiple skills than to continually refine past an already advanced level on one skill. The last noteworthy problem with being a perfectionist is that when you are successful, the best positive response that you'll get is that your stress is partially relieved. You'll always be comparing how you did to what you theoretically could have done if everything went perfectly, which is very different from how someone that's not a perfectionist could have a great appreciation for when things did go well, even if it was a little rough around the edges at times. If things don't go well for a perfectionist, they're much more prone to burnout because of how much mental strain is present in their attempts at getting better. So where does this perfectionism stem from? Is it something that you're born with, or do you develop it over time? While there are definitely valid arguments for both sides, I'm not going to be talking about the genetic side because I don't find it to be very interesting personally, and it's not something you have control over anyway, so what's the point? When it comes to evidence for nurture, there are many different external factors that could cause someone to develop a perfectionist mindset. Everybody knows the stereotype of Asian parents being way too strict and expecting their kids to have perfect grades, perfect career, perfect life, so that the parents can show off how successful their children are. While this is a stereotype, obviously there's some truth to it, and it stems from Asian culture. If everyone else is acting a certain way around you, it's much more likely that you're going to adopt that mentality because most people naturally want to fit in with those around them. Content creators often support this mentality, whether intentionally or not. This tweet by LS became a fairly hot topic in October because many people thought that it was too much to ask for a bronze player and that it would do more harm than good. Of course, some people did agree with LS, and I'm not bringing this up to bash on him. My point, however, is that it's very easy for this type of tweet to produce that perfectionism mentality in the players that want to learn from and follow LS's advice, even if that wasn't his intention. Another example of this is when content creators talk in a negative way about players that are lower ranked than them but much higher than the viewer. Even if the listener is not the intended audience, they're still going to be influenced by what the content creator had to say. Again, I'm not saying that the content creators are at fault, that's just how it goes. Things get misinterpreted or taken out of context all the time. Regardless of whether someone became a perfectionist from nature or nurture, it's important for them to understand why they think the way that they do and what they can do to change if it's impacting them negatively. If you resonate with what I'm talking about in this video, then it sounds like you too may have an issue with extraordinarily high expectations. As I said in the beginning of this video, there are some upsides to being a perfectionist. In the cases where it meshes well with a talented player, it can produce insanely good results in a very short amount of time because they are able to use the negative experiences to motivate them to continually improve upon their gameplay. The important part is that they are able to push through when people would normally start to lose confidence. It also can sometimes help people think long term because if your goal is to hit as high of a rank as possible, it doesn't make a difference to you whether you're stuck in Silver 4 or Gold 3 right now. It's all the same. Perfectionists also have a much easier time with figuring out what they're doing wrong and will be more willing to come up with creative new ways to solve difficult problems on their own instead of having to be told the exact solution by someone else. I mentioned LS before, and he is a great example of perfectionism because that's how he improved very quickly to go from unranked to diamond within just a few months. Another great example of perfectionism is Gen G's mid laner Chovy. He's known for his insanely good laning, particularly his ability to consistently get very high CS even in difficult matchups. As I said, obviously some people can do it very, very well. It's just a matter of execution and whether it works for you or not. For most people, it doesn't. But there are always going to be outliers with anything. If you're still a beginner in League and you're struggling with a perfectionist mindset, reflect on your expectations. You want to focus on being confident in your ability to improve and or perform, but you should not expect everything to go exactly as planned or even close to it. Having the willingness to adapt when things are going wrong is a very important skill for anybody. If you're a more experienced player or you perform well under pressure, then the perfectionist mindset could be helpful for you in some aspects, but remember, keep it under control. Be realistic with your expectations and continue to try your best to work on what you need to work on. Don't allow it to turn into a downward mental spiral. In order to get better at League, you don't need to play perfectly, you just need to be playing better than you did before. That's it. It's as simple as that. Speaking of playing better than you did before, as always, I offer free coaching for top lane and jungle. The information for my Discord is in the description if you're interested.